My name is Drew Eastland, and I did my research on mitigating racial tension through sport. So my research came from the 1963 Progressive article entitled A Letter to My Nephew, one of the APCAP Stone stimulus materials. And in light of recent racial issues such as Mike Brown in Ferguson, Eric Gardner in New York, as well as the Baltimore riots, racism has once again become a key social issue in American culture. So I decided to pursue my passion, which is sports, and examine how these could alleviate racial tensions, racism, and this large societal issue. So first thing I looked at was some historical evidence of this. So on the screen here you'll see two athletes, Jesse Owens on the right and Jackie Robinson on the left. These two pioneers were two African American athletes who helped to mitigate some racism and racial tension of their times. So first, we'll talk about Jesse Owens. So as a Olympic athlete in the 1936 Olympics, he won 4 gold medals. And these Olympics were significant because they were in Berlin in Nazi Germany. And in winning these medals, Owens openly challenged the racial perceptions of many of the Nazi Germans, specifically Hitler and his Aryan race ideal. Furthermore, this kind of motivated Americans to cheer more for an African-American athlete than they ordinarily would have because of their hatred of the Germans and their Aryan race concept. And the reason why we know this is because Jesse Owens is the first African-American to be remembered to win a gold medal. He's not the first to do it, but he holds a sacred place in the hearts of American citizens even still today. My second example, Jackie Robinson. A couple years after Owens, 1947, Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier. And in doing this, he endured racial slurs, watermelons being thrown at him, shoe shines being placed outside the opposing team's dugout. They likened him to an animal and went after his family. And according to research from Dr. Renford Reese, a professor at California State School, he actually was a bit of an example of civil disobedience because despite enduring all of these things, Robinson never spoke out or went after anybody who went after him. And in a way, he was almost like a precursor for the leaders of the civil rights movement 20 years later, Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King, who also practiced civil disobedience. Robinson also helped people beyond just African-American athletes. An example of this would be the African-American sports writers at the time who now had a almost way into the industry of journalism through Robinson's achievements and his involvement in professional baseball. So the second thing I looked at were the social effects of sports. So in order to do this, I first decided to examine, well, why does racism exist? So according to a site I looked at, Catholicism and Racism, 2 main reasons I identified were fear of loss or culture, cultural changes, or ignorance or lack of knowledge, and even economic gaps. So according to an article by Student Pulse, sports can actually help with 2 of these things, because sports provide key dynamics when it comes to the argumentation of communal principles by enhancing the physical and mental well-being, education, and the integration of social classes. So that's more of a cultural, economic difference. Sports bring people together because on a court, field, pitch, wherever, everybody's equal. It's all one unified team trying to achieve a certain goal. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. You all have the same goal in mind and you all work together to achieve that. In the educational aspect, I'd like to draw your attention to the graph here. This just kind of shows the social aspects of sports. 2 main things I'd like to point out are the educational stats on here. So the first arrow here, we have up to 40% higher test scores when you're involved in sports. And the second arrow here is 15% more likelihood of going to college. So what do these 2 things mean? 1, they're going to increase the education of everybody, which would lead to less ignorance and less people being racist. And 2, can also help bridge the socioeconomic gap between minorities and non-minority races, which would also help to alleviate racial tension and racism. And this chart is courtesy of Aspen Project. So just moving on to kind of today's relevances. So up in the upper right, you'll see a FIFA banner, Say No to Racism banner. These banners are displayed at a variety of soccer events. FIFA and UEFA have both promoted this ideal among their soccer players. In the center, you'll see 4 baseball players, all wearing number 42 in honor of Jackie Robinson, which they do every year on a specific date. Additionally, his number is retired at all baseball stadiums. And on the right, you see C.J. Miles, an NBA player, wearing a Black History Month t-shirt in honor of the historical achievements of African Americans and Africans just in general. One other thing I'd like to point out, which I didn't have a picture of, is the NFL Rooney Rule. So this rule states that teams must interview at least one minority in their hiring of a coach for the position. This is in order to promote diversity. So with these examples, what I'm getting at is, in many sports, soccer, football, basketball, baseball, all these leagues, teams, and players have all pushed for this end of racism, showing that sports do have an impact because the athletes in sports are role models. In fact, even President Obama, when filling out his NCAA bracket this year, said sports were a great way to bring the culture together. So, guess what I'm proposing as a solution? Well, number one, I'm saying racism can't end overnight. However, sports are a useful tool that should be further pursued as a solution to racism. And this is shown historically and socially. Athletes, leagues, teams need to continue to set a positive example in order to mitigate and eventually end racism.